Thank you guys so much for being here. I wanted to take a few minutes and interview two friends of mine, two brothers in Christ, who have also responded to real world incidents. But before we get into the specific incident that I want to talk to y'all about, and we're going to kind of do a debrief of it, I wanted to also give you a chance to talk a little bit about what is your experience in training, because this is hopefully going to encourage people to get training. I don't really care with who, but to get training because I think there's benefits. What's your background? What kind of training have you had?
Like Twitch said, my name is JT. I am not an EMT or any of that kind of stuff. I took your training class probably about a year and a half ago, and we were already friends and fell in love with the training, and they kind of couldn't get rid of me. And then I got hired on as the lead role player in the scenarios and everything. So I've helped train like 2,000, 2,500 people.
Yeah, you helped me teach a lot of people.
Yeah, so I picked up a lot on that, and have responded to a couple accidents since then.
Okay.
My name's Eric. Also friends with these guys, brothers. I have no medical trauma, no military experience. I was a desk jockey and just took one of the RT classes, at, like the ER, and
Cool.
then kind of followed them around. And
By follow, man,
That's
they
bad.
make it sound like you just attached like a donkey on a train or something. He not only took the classes, but he also, at a certain point, assisted us with a whole tour that we did when I still worked for Refuge Training.
A very long tour.
Yeah, it was.
It was a lot.
And it was one of our best tours, I think. We had really good outcomes from the students, the learning objectives, all of that. Now, the main reason we're talking, though, that you have a brief understanding of they're normal people, right? None of us are trying to convince anybody that we're something special. Tell me, and I'm going to give you all the floor. Tell me what happened on the specific crash that you guys responded together. Run through it beginning to end for me.
You want me to kind of go and you can fill in?
Well, yeah, you were driving.
Yeah, okay. So we were driving my vehicle, and I was driving. He was in the passenger seat, and my wife had gone to a women's night, and I had my kids in the back. I have a large SUV, and we were driving and just talking. I was talking to him, and we came up to this pretty big intersection that still uses stop signs, like 6 lanes or 8 lanes, something like that. And he's all of a sudden he interrupted my conversation, and he's like, "Car wrong way." And as we were approaching the intersection, a truck, instead of turning left into the proper lane, it turned left into the oncoming traffic and was just going like nothing.
Yeah,
Nothing was going on.
Full speed.
Yeah, so we stopped and went through the intersection, and we're just watching like, okay, there's oncoming traffic. Let's see if they notice, and they didn't.
No,
And-
just the way the collision happened. It was like they're gonna see him, and then just boom.
Yeah,
we just
and it
watched them collide.
Yeah, they collided. It went dark because the headlights went out, and right about then we were coming up on where the vehicles were, and luckily there was a spot to do a turn into a little side road. So we did a quick U-turn once we verified that other vehicles were actually going to stop. We didn't want to get nailed, and pulled off on that side road. And
Yeah, I jumped out and you parked the truck.
yeah, I let you out. I parked the truck, locked the doors, doorways on,
Why'd you lock the doors?
because my kids were in the car.
That's a good thing for us, I think, to note,
Yeah.
right? Is that your mindset was still, you wanted to help people, but you still had the awareness to be like, I also have to protect my kids.
Yeah, and I've responded to other accidents before. I've never had my kids with me. I'm pretty heavy on like my kids are my responsibility. But we literally watched this happen. It was almost like we were supposed to be there.
Almost
and,
like.
So and I was able to park like literally right there off the side, lock the doors, told my girls to stay in the car, honk the horn if there's a problem, and I was within eye shot. And
Yeah, so when I jumped out of the truck, I was kind of in the intersection where they had collided, and one of the people that was traveling along the proper direction of traffic also stopped, and he jumped out of his car about the time I was running through to go towards the crash. And like him and I kind of locked eyes, and I kind of was like, you get that one, I'll get this one. So like he went one way and I went another, and unfortunately the scene that I got to in the wrong way driver, there was nothing I could do. I kind of watched that man pass away.
How did that affect you, if at
Oh,
all?
greatly. That was
Because you and I talked that night. It's
Yep.
heavy.
Yeah, that was the first time I'd actually watched anyone actually die.
Yep.
So the feeling of helplessness, that was pretty hard to deal with. But we kind of the focus just like once I talked to a guy next to me, he reached in and was like, I don't feel a pulse in this guy, and I was like, I'm not seeing any good signs out of this. There's nothing that I can physically do for this man.
Yeah. He didn't have the seatbelt on. Nothing.
No.
He just took it all.
Yeah, and
So head-on collision with no seatbelt.
Yeah,
Yeah, both of the vehicles didn't have their seatbelts on.
yeah. Just this guy was in an older pickup truck, and
Yeah.
the other participant was in a more modern car. with
Yeah,
a bunch
modern
of airbags.
four-door car. I think it was white.
Yeah, it was a white Sonata.
What do you remember about airbags with that guy? Did one deploy? Was there even one? Is
The
it
truck
that
was old. It's too old. There
Okay.
was no airbag. There was
Okay.
it was it was in like the early '90s.
Yeah,
Got it.
Silverado. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and whenever I parked the car, made it secure, and I saw him over at the truck at the window, so I went to the car, and airbags had been deployed. The front window was busted out, so I didn't have to like open the door or anything. I peeked in through had to get the airbags out of the way, and one of my first takeaways from responding to this accident, just like every scenario in training, you take away something after.
Yep.
And I didn't have to think about it afterwards. In the scenario, I thought about it. I took out my flashlight because it was dark, and I reflexively, because I was going to get my kid out to put gloves on, I reflexively, like I do when I'm working in the field or on anything, put the flashlight in my mouth, and I
go
was
straight?
like, yeah, to hold it. And I was like, oh no, that's a bad idea. Like I said that, like I hadn't touched anything. I didn't have any blood on my hands, thank the Lord. But that was my first takeaway, was that's a bad idea. So I clutched that flashlight the rest of the time.
But that's what we practice doing. I do the same thing. I don't toss it on my hat, even though I wear
Yep.
a hat most of the time. I always throw it in my mouth.
Yep. And my takeaway from that was your car kit. Like I have a good sized bag now. It has a headlamp strapped around it. Like I carry a flashlight every day. I even have a spare battery on me. I don't use that. Headlamps are so much better. Flashlights, they're not very good. So I peeked in and I found this lady. There was still smoke from the airbag and everything, and she was kind of just out of it, groaning. And I was trying to see the rest. I couldn't really see in the back seat, so I went around the other side and to peek in, and there was nobody else. She actually was like perfectly placed in her seat, and she was kind of just really out of it, groaning. And I was talking to her, trying to get her to, talk back to me, and she was just totally out of it.
It was about the time that I walked up.
Yeah, I hopped in through the passenger door, and I threw a pulse ox on her because I EDC a pulse ox, and her pulse was like really low. Like she was
It was
out
in
of
the
it.
30s, I think.
It was stupid low.
Yeah.
And I left the pulse ox on her, and it started coming back up pretty quickly. And I really couldn't see very much wrong with her. She was like, and she wasn't wearing her seatbelt either,
Mhm.
but she was perfectly placed back in the seat. And like we talk about in class and stuff, it's not always bloody.
Yeah.
She was wearing blue jeans, and I couldn't see. There was like one little tear in her blue jeans that had a little bit of blood on it, nothing bad.
It's not always like the movies. In fact, I find it's most of the time not.
Yeah, and she had a little bit of her right ear had some blood coming out of it, just a little bit. And you couldn't even see that from your
Mhm.
vantage point. And she was just out of it. And
What was really surprising was about this time, EMTs arrived.
yeah,
Like that was really fast.
Yeah, it
for
was
the
really quick.
rural area that we live in.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
that was really fast. It was almost like they watched. Like it felt to me that they arrived as I was done running. Like when
Yeah.
I was thinking about it, I was done running to the truck, and they were like there were lights already. That's
Sure.
what it felt like.
yeah. And looking back on it, I think when we got back in the car at the end of it, I think the whole thing took half an hour.
Let me ask you,
Yeah,
who?
And I don't think they actually arrived as quickly as we thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the perception.
Yeah, the
was
perception
probably
was
that.
like, wow,
Yeah.
that was really quick.
Well,
Yeah.
that's something we hit on all the classes
Yeah.
too. Is your mind is weird stuff. Did either of y'all call 911?
No, I think
No, because when I
Somebody else
looked
was
at
already
the
on the
guy
phone.
that was running at me, he had the phone up, and I think
Cool.
if I remember correctly, I might be putting a little hero on it. I don't know. I was like, "Did you call? Is that 911?" And he was like, "I'm on the phone" or whatever. I assumed
Cool.
he had 911.
Cool.
Yeah.
But you were under the understanding that somebody's already covered that base. No reason to do it twice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, which one of y'all? I remember because we did this debrief when it happened. Which one of y'all encountered or heard some random
That was me.
pedestrian? All right, tell us
That was
about
me.
that.
So that was after we had worked on this woman a little bit. we're kind of letting the EMTs do their thing, like start to do their thing, and I just heard it. There's this woman just screaming,
Running.
just
randomly.
screaming, "Ah!" And I was like, turn around. There's this woman like
Wasn't she running from the gas station?
yes, over a quarter mile away.
So she's not even in the crash.
Nope.
No, and she's just screaming and she's like screaming, "How about the children? Where are the children?" And I looked at her and I was like, "Where are the kids at?" And she's like, "Where are the kids?" And I was like, "What kids?" And she's like, "I don't know."
So she's implanting what she's been imagining
Yes.
for some reason
Yeah.
in this scenario. It's this imaginary family that doesn't exist.
So I pulled training out and I looked at her and I said, "You, behind that sign, sit." And she went behind the sign and sat.
That command presence, you
Yep.
dictated it.
Yeah. You ran that scene, man. And
Good.
the funny thing is after we finished the accident, we were going over this. I didn't hear that lady once. Like I literally didn't hear any of that. I mean, I was in the car
Yeah.
dealing with her, and I heard people around the car and stuff, but I didn't hear a lick of that.
Okay.
So
Let's hit on that for a second. So you heard this lady yelling, which we joke about in class, and I think people only think it's a joke. But you told me when we debriefed that night, you're like, dude, you aren't kidding. People came out of nowhere just to scream, because I used to say the same thing when I was a cop.
and you played that role.
Yeah, you've been
I
that
did. I
guy
was that
for
role.
me. It's like, go cause chaos. Just start yelling for no reason. People do that, and I don't understand it. But like when I experienced that as a police officer, there were many times where I'm steadily hearing a radio in this ear or this ear, whichever I had it in at the time, and I'm hearing all the other people, and I'm trying to focus on whatever the heck's going on that matters. And you're also trying not to get run over or killed or whatever the case is. And lo and behold, there's going to be somebody that comes. I think they stopped washing dishes, like Dane Cook talks about, just to come out and scream.
Yep.
And it's unfortunate because that's the response that they have programmed as compared to an actual productive thing to do.
Yeah.
They became more of a problem. They distracted your focus, at least for a moment,
Yeah.
because you had to tell that person to go sit behind a sign instead of being able to use them because they were too hysterical.
Yeah.
So what did you hear? What do you recall specifics, if anything? hearing?
Well, mostly I was talking to her. I could hear people coming up to the door and talking. Pretty quickly, as her pulse started coming back up,
Yeah.
She started coming to more. And that was the point where, and then she started moving around more and louder groaning. And that was the point that I realized she had leg problems.
Yeah.
So what
when
happened
she started
was-
moving, like
Yeah.
you were in the passenger seat, and I remember you looking at me and saying, "Hey, her pulse is coming up," and I
Yeah.
was just like, "Awesome!" And I looked down, and her leg is moving, but only the top part of her leg.
Yeah, both of her legs, she had like femur breaks above the knee,
Mhm.
and she was moving, but her lower
lower
legs
legs
were
weren't.
not moving.
And to give
And,
everybody at home, real quick, a tidbit if you don't know, the femur break is a really big risk of cutting the femoral artery that runs right beside it, and that's the biggest artery in your body. So it'll dump out blood if you're not careful.
And it was amazing to me. It was almost like a miracle that her arteries weren't cut, because I was trying to calm her down and keeping her from moving.
Yeah.
Because, and I remember distinctly, I was holding her legs, telling her, "It's going to be okay, sweetie, it's going to be okay." And I remember feeling as she moved, I could feel the femurs grinding
Mhm.
on both of them.
Wow.
They were fully broken, and I could feel it just da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, and it was about that time that EMTs actually came, like, prepared to the car.
Yeah.
I intercepted one of them going towards a truck, and I was like, that woman needs help. Stop. Go that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so they peeked in. They were like, "Yep, we're going to the car." And JT started relaying the vitals
Yeah.
back to the EMTs, and the EMTs were kind of like, you know,
I bet they were
who are
probably
you?
taken
Yeah.
back by it.
And so they ended up tasking you to go get
C-collar.
the C-collar, and
Yes.
so you
telling me to get stuff out of the ambulance. I'm like, what?
That's cool.
I was like, okay, I guess I'll go in your ambulance.
But like there was a moment where I remember looking through the driver's window, and the EMT, there was a very small EMT woman with me, and she was like, you need to stabilize her head. And I
You
looked-
do?
Yeah. And I said, she has a broken femur. We
Two
need
of
to
them.
fix that. I didn't know about the second one yet.
Yeah.
I was like, we need to take care of that. And she goes, no, she needs to be still, and then we need to get her out of this car. And I had this moment where I was like, okay, you're the expert.
Sure.
Like okay, I'm gonna back up. And like, I remember like they left us alone to put the C-collar on her.
Yeah, it was just the two of
Wow.
us,
Yeah.
and like I put it on, and I mean, all truth, we did never put C-collars on in class.
No, we
Like,
focus on bleeding.
I've put them in orders at work, but
Yeah.
I've never actually done one before. So I literally looked at the picture.
Yeah.
and I put it on, and I remember we didn't do it tight enough, and like
Yeah.
she had slipped her chin down into it. We're like, okay, we got to redo this, and
Yeah.
then we
That's
got it
a
on
good
good.
takeaway,
She
too,
really
though.
didn't want it on.
You'd never tinkered with one, much less whatever their model was, because there's multiple variations
Yeah,
of that.
yeah, it wasn't the same as the office.
Yeah, so that makes you feel a little bit. It's cool that you were confident enough that they thought you guys were good to go with that. It
Yeah.
sucks that there was no prior exposure to whatever their gear was.
yeah.
Yeah, and so there was a little bit of like, the EMTs were telling some of the bystanders like, "Hey, we need to get this door open," and like this one guy goes after the door frame and he's ripping on the door frame, and she's like, I don't know, someone was kicking it, and I was just like, I kind of looked at them and I was like, guys, it's locked. Like, you're not gonna get it open. Yes, it's crushed, but like it's pinned.
Yeah.
And there was this kind of like, like moment of clarity that I just
Yeah.
like looked. And I was like, I can see the latch mechanism. And like I have a history of cars, and I was like, I know what that is. And I was like, stop. Boom, and the door opens, and they're like,
Pop. They just looked at you like,
Oh
who
my
is this
God.
man?
If only someone would unlock this door.
well, yeah. So the whole thing was in pieces, and I was like, oh wait, I know how that latch works. I'm gonna push that little lever, and the whole thing
cool.
came open. And so they got her out, and they got her on the stretcher.
Well, and they were both women.
Yeah.
The EMTs
Oh,
were
yeah,
both
yeah,
women, and they couldn't get her out.
No.
They weren't strong enough to actually pull her out.
Yeah, and they ended up
they
doing
were,
a bunch of like jerking motions.
Yes, I remember the one was just yanking, and I'm like, she's got broken femurs. You're gonna rip the artery. Like
Yeah.
somehow it's not cut yet, but you're gonna freaking cut it.
Yeah. And so ended
They
up,
had us help.
Yeah, I had to like arm hooked under her arm
Yeah.
and kind of around her chest, but like I just ended up just like
I think I
get
was in the
stretcher
back
just
seat
pull.
helping.
Sure.
So we kind of muscled her onto the stretcher, and then they had the EMTs themselves had a moment where I think they realized the amount of injury that she had, and they stopped.
They stopped.
They stopped.
What does that mean? Literally stop
They stopped.
moving?
They
nothing
stopped
more.
and stared at her.
Like,
Oh,
what do we do
wow.
next, guys? Oh,
and
wow.
and training kind of kicked in again, and I, having helped out with classes before,
Yep.
and I was kind of helping out with some like the critique of other students in classes. I kind of slipped into that role, and I kind of feel bad about it a little bit, but like only a little bit. I was like, this woman needs a tourniquet. I have a tourniquet. Can I put it on her?
Sure.
And she like looked at me and was like, we have tourniquets in the ambulance.
Yeah, she kept saying that.
That's she was locked.
We
on
have
that phrase.
tourniquets.
We have tourniquets in the ambulance, and I said, no, she needs it now. Can we put it on her? Can we please put a tourniquet on this woman now?
Now let's pause there for a second. What made you want to put a tourniquet on? Because we already said there wasn't massive bleeding.
The femur
what
break.
was making
the
okay.
femur break? She's going to get transported.
There's no reason
It could
not
happen
to.
at any moment.
And
And
that's
you're
where
not,
I was hitting.
and you're not going to know that it happened.
Yep. So
Yeah.
if you missed that, what he just said is there's no reason not to. You're not going to hurt her more because of the injuries you
Yep.
directly have already stated. But if they move her wrong, and it sounded like there was some
Yep.
effort to move her wrong, it's jerking around. This
Yep.
bone is already
Well,
broken.
She's not staying still.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, she's in pain, and the bone itself, you don't know the extent of how broken internally it is.
Yeah.
Is it this jagged edge that's getting ready to
Yeah.
cut this artery? So, in an abundance of caution, you're like, put a tourniquet on so we don't have to worry about it,
And-
right?
And
Yeah.
I've gone to more than one accident, so I don't
Yeah.
think I'm mixing this up with another one. I helped cut pants off, right, on this one?
You did. That was later,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the one EMT was cutting down one leg or up one leg, and I started cutting. And another lesson that I took away was you should have shears on you, which I carry.
Mhm.
I actually carried really expensive Leatherman,
Yeah.
the Raptors, and I love those things. I actually use them all the time on other things, like when we're doing electric fencing, like
Yeah.
cutting through the plastic wire and stuff. Like they're really handy. They're
Yeah.
awesome. So I learned the lesson of you should have shears, but you should never use them
Yeah.
so that they're
Why?
good and sharp.
What'd you notice?
Because he
Because-
started,
And I'm literally going, and I'm like, why is this taking so long? And she's
she
going,
met him at the knee.
yeah, she's no, she cut her pant
Yeah.
and then started coming down mine
Yeah.
and met me at the knee.
That's
and
what I'm
it
saying,
was
like, she
literally
went
like
one
when you
side
do
and
a
one
Christmas
side.
present and
Yeah.
you're just like, you feel all
Yeah.
efficient. Yeah, and mine I was literally having to cut through, and I'm like, why is this taking so
Okay.
long? And
Yeah.
it was like recently before that we had done a bunch of fence work
Yep.
on my farm,
Yep.
and I'd used it a bunch, and I dulled my shears.
So run us back now. So you're at the moment where you're telling her you need a tourniquet, or this casualty needs a tourniquet. The EMT's telling you, yeah, we got some in the vehicle. What happened next?
We still didn't put tourniquets on, and that's kind of one of my regrets. Like I know that the woman survived. right? I know that she survived this incident and the couple days afterwards, but and like I would have felt way worse. But like there was no harm in putting a tourniquet on her when JT and I were just talking to her at the car.
Yeah.
Like when we noticed that she had a femoral break, we should have put a tourniquet on right then. Like completely capable of doing it. We both had tourniquets on us.
Yeah.
We could have done it then.
Yeah, and we were telling them like she needs a tourniquet, and I remember you like looking at me and like just like she needs a tourniquet. I'm like this is their scene now. They're here. Like
Sure.
So
we shouldn't have done
but
that.
that kind of that paradigm of their scene broke for me when I was in the ambulance. So JT started cutting her pants off, and like I was like, I'm kind of sitting there like, whoa, we're in this. Like
Yeah, they let us in the ambulance.
we're responding. Like we're actually responding to this. It wasn't like some Samaritan thing. I'm actually in the ambulance now, and like we cut her pants, and then it was I just like JT was like, I'm putting a tourniquet on, and I was like, so am I. And like at that moment, one of the EMTs threw a tourniquet at me, and so I didn't use my personal one. I just
at him.
I grabbed it.
Okay.
I slipped it over her leg, and one of the EMTs started doing it, and I literally grabbed her hand and I said, "You're doing it wrong." And I stopped her, reset it, and then put a couple twists in it. It was perfect.
So let's pause there. What was wrong about it?
What was it? It was twisted.
Okay.
It was twisted,
So it's
and
too narrow of a
she
band,
didn't
then.
She
start.
wasn't going tight
It
enough.
wasn't tight. It wasn't tight to begin with, and
Okay.
she started. I was like, "No, like."
Okay.
I know we have to. This woman's not dead yet. We have time.
Yeah.
We haven't applied it. I'm redoing this.
Yeah.
And I put a tourniquet on her right side, and I remember I remember the tourniquet all of a sudden was in my hand, and I had taken it fully apart.
Okay.
I don't even remember doing that.
Yeah.
And but I do remember while I was putting it on, I was talking to you, and it was almost like in training. I'm like,
Yeah.
make sure you don't get it
High and
twisted,
tight.
high
Don't
and
twist
tight,
it.
tighter than you think it should be. And I
Yes.
remember just yanking
Yeah.
on that thing, and yeah.
Yeah, and so it was right after that. Like we both put the tourniquets on, and so this woman, like she had an arm break, she had a lower compound fracture in her leg. Like this woman, like she was extremely hurt, and we put the tourniquets on. We kind of stood up, and the EMTs looked at us, and like one of them looked at me and said, "What's next?"
Wow.
And to be fair, we made lots of mistakes,
Yeah,
and we realized those pretty quick afterwards.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking trash
No.
about them at all. We live in a smaller town. They don't get a lot of incidents.
Yeah,
And I think the one that had said what's next, she was really young, and for all we know, that was literally her first night on an
Yeah.
ambulance, and she was like in whatever the trial or whatever.
It may have literally been her first fatality wreck.
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
could have been.
Yeah. It's probably the case
Yeah.
if she was young.
Yeah, and what was awesome in that moment, like they were looking at me, and I was about to say like, I don't know, let's go, right? And right then, highway trooper opened the side door of the ambulance, because you had left already,
Yeah, I
You
went.
left
I went to
with-
check on the kids.
and they closed the doors behind you.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm going to the hospital. Like,
Yeah.
and so I was like, well, I've got my phone. I can call somebody. Like, I'll get a ride. And right then, a trooper opened the door and was like, life flight is 15 minutes out. Does she have time? And like, I kind of looked, and they looked at me, and they looked at them, and I was like, you're going to life flight. Like, you're
Yeah.
going. And they said one more thing, and they pulled out a pelvic girdle.
Okay.
And like I have never touched one before in my life.
Yep,
I have
same here.
never seen one. I don't know what you're trying to
Yeah.
do.
And I think the name she was saying was the more like technical name, and I'm like, lady, I don't know what the heck you're talking about.
Yeah, and
Like,
so
like it took me a couple times to figure out what she was saying.
yeah.
Sure.
So they didn't have the muscle to pick her up
Yeah.
to actually put it on.
What a good takeaway that is.
Yeah,
You got to be fit enough to move a person.
yeah,
Yeah,
And,
you probably
and,
shouldn't have an all-female ambulance.
and this was a very small woman.
yeah.
She was not overweight.
Nope.
She was not
Nope.
tall.
Nope.
She was a very, very small woman. So
The casualty or the
casualty.
EMT?
The
casualty,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So like muscling that girdle on, and like she's like, it just left it to me to finish it. And I was like, I don't know this. Like literally, I don't know that. And so she finished it up, but like it was interesting. And then I kind of just backed out, and like I think I closed the ambulance door and was like,
Well,
I'm done.
Well, you had a moment where you looked at her and you said,
Oh, yeah.
she's yours now."
Yep.
Mm.
you got this, or something like that. I don't remember
Yeah.
exactly what you said.
I remember looking at her and saying, yeah, I kind of, I didn't like grab her and square her up to me, but I just, like, we met eyes and I said, she's yours now. And like, I just like backed out, like,
Faded
slowly
away.
backed out of the ambulance. I was like, because that is the end of the extent of where I was, it was the extent of training,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
we
it
were
is.
going past the extent of training,
Yeah.
and I was done. Like, I could not have done more for that woman.
Yeah.
But that's good that you noted that and that you acknowledged, like, this is the stuff I know. This is now bridging into stuff I don't. It's
Yeah.
like if they had asked you to run an IV, it's like we don't do that in class.
Yeah.
What I find is interesting is I think some pieces of what we throw into training, again, in the moment, people are probably like just kind of shrugging it off. A couple of them real quick is the noise, the talks that we've had about how much you won't hear and how much you will, random sounds that you'll remember, stuff that matters that you won't remember, shaky hands, you were witnessing it with an EMT, and again, that's somebody that we would count on. This is their role in life is to respond in this, but they probably don't have a lot more experience. And then you go to moving a casualty. We do that in classes, and I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm never going to use this." Well, I mean, maybe not in the open space environment, maybe not in a hotel or a school, but you literally still had to move a casualty.
Yeah.
You still had to manipulate the human body with consideration to injuries. That's exactly what we're trying to get across anytime that we do classes. And if you've never had to pick up the dead weight of a human, and then on top of that, be concerned about how you move them because of
Yep.
what they're already damaged with. If I move this wrong, it can totally cut that artery, and we don't have tourniquets on it yet, or whatever the case is. That's a big deal. But hopefully, some of what I'm hoping you guys took from it was like, okay, we moved casualties, maybe not the same way, but the body moves in certain ways. That is helpful. I found that when I was a cop. After I got kind of a base understanding of how the bones move and how they don't, then putting people in handcuffs became easier because the hands and elbows and all that move a certain way. Hopefully that was a similar thing. What about after? So you handed off the casualty, your hands are off that person, it's not your problem anymore. What'd you feel right after? Let's start with like you got back to the car.
We got back to the car.
Well, you had a different experience than I did.
Let's hit this one at a time. Let's go
Yeah.
JT, and then from that moment we'll get with Eric.
We got back to the car, and I believe we prayed, and we hugged, and said, you know, we can't do anymore. So we prayed, hugged you a bunch because I could kind of tell you were getting a little emotional. Not that I wasn't. And then I was faced with the dilemma of like, okay, I now have this car with all my kids in it, and I just responded to this accident, and I'm all like, you know, like bloody and stuff. Like not horribly bloody,
Yeah.
but I like, how do I get in this car without touching everything and like
Without freaking out your kids.
yeah. So I actually like started doing like a little kit in the car of I call it an after action kit, like stuff to clean up and all that kind of stuff. But I won't go into that. You can talk about your experience.
So yeah, after it was done, like that was the first person I've watched die, and that was really profound. I think it helped out a lot that I got to help another person at the same time.
Instead of just feeling useless
Yeah.
because they were done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what was interesting about like when we hugged and we prayed and I got to think about it a little bit, and by the time we actually got to where we packed up the girls, we made sure everything was good, we kind of cleaned up a little bit, and we got to where we were going. And when I got there, like everyone else, there was a paramedic there. There was
Yep.
guys that had responded to other incidences. Everyone had been through training, so
Yeah.
like it was this instant like, what happened? What'd you do? What's going on? And like I really just wanted to just like sit and think about what I did and just really decompress from it. And one of the things I kind of got upset about was like literally everybody told me that I instantly did the wrong thing by not having gloves on. It was instant. That was a really dumb thing, Eric. You should not have done that.
Really? I don't think
And-
I heard this when I talked to you. I don't remember this.
Yeah, it kind of hurt.
Did I put gloves on? I think I took
you
my
had-
kid out to start doing it. I don't remember
Yeah.
if I ever actually did though.
Yeah, she wasn't really bloody.
No, there was like zero blood almost.
Yeah, I got blood on my shirt though.
Yeah.
Because her ear, and I ended up having to like kind of cradle her as she came out of the car.
I got blood on like my shears and stuff.
But like my personal after action for that one was my tourniquet now is staged with gloves inside of it.
Yep.
So like that was my thing. But like
So why did it irritate you?
because I don't know, it was like this kind of the you wanted to talk to me a lot about afterwards after watching a guy die about like making sure that I was okay.
Yeah.
But like I was processing it the way that I needed to process it. Because at one point I was standing in our friend's kitchen and I'm just staring at the floor. And I was replaying what had happened. I was replaying what, all the things that I did. Yep, I was beating myself up a little bit for not trying to put the tourniquet on faster, or, she could have had it on in the car. And I was kind of just sitting there, like, just compiling what it was that event was.
Yeah.
And people kept, my friends, my brothers kept coming up to me going, "Are you okay? You're being really quiet. Are you okay? Like, is this guy gonna go like freak out? Like,
Knowing what you'd just seen too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They had heard that already, knowing that you had just seen someone die, and they're like, well, why aren't you okay? It's
Yeah.
almost, why aren't you okay is almost what it sounds like.
Yeah, and so I kind of was like, no, leave me alone.
Yeah.
One, and two, let me do what I need to do to process this moment. Because like me personally, I have to take something stressful or something traumatic, literally put it in a box, categorize it with what was going on,
Yeah.
so that my mom's face doesn't end up on her body in a dream later. Right? Like that was that woman. That was
Sure.
that woman in that car at that incident at this time and place. Like I don't want this to bleed over in other parts of my life.
Yeah.
And like these guys were just sitting there like, why aren't you like talking to us? Why aren't you crying hysterically? Why aren't you, I'm like, no, let me do
Yeah.
my thing. Like it just, and like even you wanted me to come over, and I was like, no, I just want to go home and sleep
Yep,
right
and I
now.
get it.
Like I don't want to talk about it more. Like I want to go home and sleep.
Yep.
I'd like to hit on some of the spiritual stuff. There was a couple, we didn't realize it right away, but that night, my wife, once she got done at the event and stuff and got back, she was talking to my girls. I got 3 daughters, and she was talking to them individually, making sure they were okay. And all 3 of them said that, like, she asked kind of about, like, what did you see?
Yep.
And all 3 of them separately couldn't hear the other one. She had separated different rooms. Said that they couldn't see the cars hit because there was a bright light.
And
There was no bright light.
Yeah, your wife came to me and she was like, Eric, what blew up?
Nope.
Like what happened? And I was like, blew up. And she's like, yeah, what flashed towards the truck? And I was like, everything went dark. That's
Yeah.
how we knew they hit.
They hit and the headlights went out and literally just the whole thing went dark.
Like the whole
But the
scene went
memory
dark.
of your girls is that it was the opposite. It was very,
Yeah.
very bright.
They
couldn't see.
didn't see the cars hit because it got really, really bright.
Praise the
So
Lord for
they literally were like shielded from seeing it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And another thing that I was like real proud dad, come to find out what they were doing while we were doing what we were doing was they were in the car and my oldest wouldn't let my 2 younger daughters look.
How old's your oldest, if you don't mind?
She's about 10 years old, around that.
So it's not like she's
Yeah.
18, guys.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
she wouldn't let them turn around, and I think she was kind of telling them what was happening. But she was watching, and they were in the car praying.
That's awesome. It's funny the stuff we put priorities on, and I've seen this with other things, like probably from a good heart condition, but the critique everybody's wanting to throw you in, and it doesn't feel good when it's a critique, especially right after. Critiques are not really welcome in those moments. It might be later, but not right the same day. And I had that a bunch of times where I was an officer, I had rendered aid to somebody, and then the first thing I'm going to hear from a coworker is what I should have done different, but they weren't doing it with me. And it's not that they, in their case, like many of them chose not to. It's not that they just weren't there. And so that royally ticked me off, honestly, where I was like, when you start doing this, you can tell me what you think, is what would come out of my mind. And it would change, my perspective on them a little bit for the worse. I think the brothers were probably trying to encourage you with the gloves so that you don't get sick next time. However, at the same time, they weren't there either.
Yeah.
You made the decision that you felt like was best in the moment, and you're the one that has to live with that one way or another. Whether it's going and getting tested for some disease from the blood exposure or not. In the moment, your mind told you, this is prioritized. I'm going to put my hands on, I'm going to do something.
Yeah.
And I can't critique you for that. And if at any point somebody that ever sees this is either going through, getting ready to go through anything like this, because we're all going to find these moments in life, right? Don't shut down and withdraw from everybody, but at the same time, if people are just being overly critical, don't hang around them, because I can tell you that that's hard to be around. At the same time, what I was trying to do, whether it's better or worse, is I was trying to make sure that you could talk it out, because I've actually been to a lot of those where people were dead or were dying or were really jacked up or whatever the case is. And I always found, even if I didn't really feel like talking about it when it, like the day that it happened, the 24-hour span with my wife, was really helpful. And even if I didn't really feel like it, having the environment that she always provided, that I could speak about it the exact way I felt it. So I didn't have to filter it. I didn't have to be careful with my words. I could literally speak it the way I felt it. That helped me not retain it as long. And hopefully that's what it did. But if not, then I am sorry for that, because it was not me in any way trying to make that day even harder than it was. But that is the heart condition I had. And at the end of the day, seeing someone pretty much take their last breath, right? It'll stick with you. And it's not a pretty thing. I think a lot of us, especially in the U.S., have seen so many movies and played too many video games, and we're like, death's no big deal. Yeah, it's kind of final, though, when you're actually seeing an actual person, even if you didn't know them.
Yeah.
Where it's like, they're not here anymore. Their time is done. And back to a spiritual thing, not only is their time on this earth done, if you have any faith in Christ at all or not, that's the finality of it. Your time to make that decision is up. And there's no way to go back, at least in the belief structure I've got, there's no way to go back and make any adjustments now. Nope, my time's done. And that's really sad if you do know the person and you do have concern about where they were at with their salvation. And I had that on my own part, like yesterday, and then about a month ago at a separate time, where I'm hearing about some of these guys that I've trained overseas they're dead now. And I know what their faith was, because we had conversations about it, where they were adamant that they were into Norse paganism. And it didn't matter with what compassion I brought the gospel, they rejected it. Now the hope is that they had that split moment between death and life, where they realized that they were lost. That's my hope with it. I also don't have any control of that. Kind of like you guys had to do with the ambulance. At a certain point, you have to step back and say, I can't do anymore. My time with this person's done. And that's what I have to get to as well. It doesn't change the fact that it's not heavy, though. I've got pictures of some of these guys, and I remember the specific conversations. I had this Moldovan chaplain with me, with one of them specifically, and this guy was just absolutely joking about the gospel. Not the Moldovan, the soldier was. He was literally saying, he's like, I'm going to go do an animal sacrifice now and get ready to go on deployment. I mean, leave me alone. The Moldovan wouldn't let go of his hand. He's like trying to cast demons out of this kid, and he's pretty much a kid. He was like 20 max. And he's like, please don't go before you know Christ. And the guy was like, let my hand go. And eventually you have to. And it's sad, I just learned that exact guy got split in half by a mortar round. You don't know, man. Like, that's the same death that a car crash is. It just looks different. So if you're watching this, don't waste any time. If you're not sure where you're at with your faith, this whole thing was mainly to just kind of recap and emphasize the importance of training, practice, mindset, willingness to act, I think is a big one. But another big piece of it is to make sure that you're never gonna die, you know, because your physical self is gonna die. It's gonna happen one day. You're gonna have people in your life that will pass away if you live long enough. But eventually, it's going to be our turn. And I don't want to go and meet the Lord and Him say, "Depart from me, I didn't know you."
Yep.
Any final thoughts, guys?
Train.
Yeah, train. Each time you train, you'll realize mistakes. Don't get hung up on them. Just learn from them. And if you actually respond in the moment, you're going to do the same thing,
Yep.
but you'll be better off because you're trained.
How'd y'all feel about having a teammate?
Oh, it was great.
It was. I'm not sure I would have been as composed without a teammate.
And they don't have to know the extent, but you guys are very close, like
Yeah.
brotherly. Not just brothers in Christ, but you guys are close.
Yeah.
And I agree. Just after hearing it the day of and hearing it today, I think that you guys were much stronger together, and that's another big piece of the whole
I'm told to
thing.
go out in pairs, so
Yep.
Yep.
made it a lot easier to control a lot
Yeah.
of the scene.
I mean, you're getting pole socks while I'm telling a woman to sit behind a sign.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then we're both teaming to get her out of the car, and
Yeah.
Yep. You're
without
watching
really
each
even
other's back.
talking. We didn't even talk. I barely talked to you.
Yeah.
It was more like looks and
Yeah.
like
Yep.
grab a thing, look at you, and you're like, yeah.
That's time spent, though. That's how much time y'all have had together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether it was at training or just life. you
Yeah.
know? And again, man, the whole focus is that we want more people to survive. We want more people to have that little extra time. And the whole thing I was really proud of, and I told y'all this tonight, of is like, great job. You know, I didn't get told that a lot when I was a cop. It was kind of taboo to render aid because most of the people I was rendering aid to were criminals.
Yeah.
And that wasn't really smiled upon. And so I didn't get the good job much. So the night that y'all were telling me, I made sure I said it out loud, because it's one thing to feel like you probably did a good job.
Mhm.
It's another one to I think be told. It's
Yeah.
like you did what you could do. You did right.
Yeah.
And they survived. And that's pretty awesome. So
Yeah,
great
we
job.
heard that a couple days later that like someone, one of our friends actually called into the
Yeah.
hospital, made
Yep.
sure, because they're also like, where did these tourniquets come? They're not in
They
inventory.
said- They said, "Where'd the trainer tourniquet come
The
from?"
Blue Cat 7.
Yeah, because they don't carry blue cats on the
Yep.
ambulance, and they didn't share anything about how they didn't put the tourniquets on. So,
Yeah.
Yep. Because they didn't.
yeah.
But yeah,
Yep.
that's when we found out that she had made it to the hospital. She made it alive, and that she was in recovery. It was serious, with life-threatening injuries, but she was stable. So
Yeah.
It's all about fighting back against death, guys. Go save one more life. Thank you, guys.